what next for the G20? As you well know, it will be the turn of the United States to hold that gathering in December next year. And we've already got signs of what is to come because the Americans have hit the delete button. All traces of South Africa have disappeared from that G20 website as if we have not hosted the party in the first place. Whilst there was much high-fiving and celebration here locally, there are those who have been warning that perhaps we were a little too quick to congratulate ourselves and that there are real consequences on the way. One of the people keeping an eye on all of that is Dr. Terrence McNamee, whom we've often had on the show as a geopolitics specialist. And he joins us now on the line. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time.
Good to be with you, Bongani.
And just like that, it's as if it never happened.
Yeah. The U.S. has been telegraphing this for some time. I mean, it expressed itself many months ago before it pulled out of the G20 that it believed that South Africa had moved too far away from the core purpose and the raison d'etre of the G20, which is more strictly about economic and financial stability. So none of this surprises me. And I think, in advance of the summit, the remarks by Minister Lamola about white supremacy, then the handover issue. Now, my own view is that the U.S. Would have done the website thing and the G20 reset anyway, but I think things like Lamola's remarks and the handover issue made the booting out of South Africa inevitable.
You and I have had furious debates off air about how South Africa plays these issues and the appropriate responses to them. Politically, of course, I suppose both sides have to try and keep their constituencies on board. At the very least, it seems to me that the South African government can do is to at least try and save face with South Africans.
Yeah, and I think that is important, Bongani. And I thought that, the G20 summit, I mean, these are historical moments, are exactly that. They are moments, they are fleeting. But if, South Africa could sustain what you might call the vibe shift and really turn this into a nation building moment, because South Africa is a sovereign country, it can do as it chooses. If this feeling could be sustained and there was some domestic dividend for driving, reforms and giving more purpose, then I think that would be a win, regardless of what happens internationally. But my own sense is that, unfortunately, the challenges that South Africa faces, whether it's crime and corruption and everything that's in our face, I don't think these good vibes are going to be able to be sustained. And I think the danger is that this is going to recede very, very quickly from the imagination, just like it is in terms of globally.
Let's use an example that has recently come out. If you think of any payment system around the world, the SWIFT system, which is controlled out of New York, is very important, right, in terms of international financial transactions. The announcement this week that Standard Bank is rather going to be integrating to the cross-border interbank system, which is the Chinese system, allowing African businesses to pay their Chinese suppliers directly in yuan. Is that the kind of move that now makes sense for South Africa and South African businesses?
Well, listen, I think if you look across the world, everyone is making what you might call small incremental steps to decouple from the US economy. I mean, Prime Minister Carney in Canada is often saying that, the age where the United States was the global economic leader and it sees that role, those days are gone, right? So there are small incremental steps, but I don't think we should read too much into this move by Standard Bank. I mean, remember, it's already 20% owned by China. I mean, this makes basic commercial sense, but most clients, I mean, even Chinese ones, they still operate and invoice in US dollars. So using the renminbi, I mean, this is just a reflection of the growing importance of China, but we must remember that the biggest banks in the world that already do this are American ones. So we can't read too much into this.
Well, let's talk about Mark Carney and his declaration recently that the decades-long process of the ever closer economic relationship between Canada and the US has ended. That kind of thing you're beginning to hear more and more from leaders. You would have least expected it, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we are confronting a new reality. I mean, the facts remain the United States is still about 27% of the world economy. It's still by far the most influential actor. But we have to respond to this change. And I think, when we talk about South Africa and we talk about, some of the bravado around this G20 summit in terms of standing up to the United States, I mean, we have to recognize that if relations were to continue to deteriorate, let's say to the point where the United States imposed general sanctions on South Africa, I'm not saying that's likely, but it's not impossible, then that would have massive impact on the South African economy because that would affect the operations of companies like Amazon or Microsoft or Apple or say Visa. Visa has over 50% of the market share for credit cards in South Africa. So we have to recognize still that the United States is a fundamentally important player for
Dr.
the near
McNamee,
term.
if I may come
Yep,
in, I think everybody
sure.
recognizes all of that. I suppose the line of my questioning, and before we come to what America could do, was if countries like
Hmm.
Canada, for example, are
Sure.
able to respond, why shouldn't South Africa? I think that's where I was trying to go. But let's talk about the
Hmm.
American response. I mean, in all the examples you mentioned there, that would also hurt American companies who are obviously not in South Africa for charity either.
It would, absolutely. But I think, we have to recognize the power imbalance. I mean, there must be 15, 20 US companies that alone are larger than the entire South African economy. So yes, a lot of people talk about, well, if the United States needs platinum group metals, it's got to get them from South Africa. Sure, that is a factor. And exports, to the United States are not significant in terms of the Canada relationship, which was like 75% of our exports. But we do have to get real is that the United States still holds enormous economic levers, and particularly in terms of its private sector. So, the B20 and apparently relationships around business to business were really positive around the G20, which is great. But we can't forget again that the power imbalance at the moment is still so significant. So this relationship, maybe it is replaceable at some point, but we have to recognize just how important it is.
So if you got a call from the union buildings and they say, Dr. McNamee, we've seen you on television, we've heard you on the radio, you are this international scholar, this geopolitics specialist, give us some advice. If Minister Lamola or the president phoned, what would you tell them to do?
Well, I would think that they have to recognize that the poking the bear strategy doesn't work. But I think I would also look internally. I mean, you referred to Adi Enthoven's great speech a few weeks back, and he talked about what's going right in South Africa, what's being turned around. And we know what it is: energy, electricity, all of the great stuff that's happening around Operation Vulindlela. Why is that the case? Well, because you have great people that are driving the reforms. We have to ask the same question about South African foreign policy. Do we have the right ideas? Do we have the right strategy? Do we have the right people?
But
And I think,
doesn't that
yep.
assume business as usual? We're dealing with, and I'm going to use this word, adversary who is not basing any of the criticism on fact, on reality. And this is information that's readily available. And so, how do you? It would be one thing if there was some
Mhm.
truth to what the Trump administration is saying. There isn't, and they know it.
Okay, so in terms of foreign policy, remember, Bongani, that knowing what the other side wants and why is just as important as understanding what your country is seeking and how to get it. These are the facts about the United States. It believes, and this is a bipartisan issue, that South Africa is compromised from a national security perspective by virtue of its relations with Cuba and Iran and Venezuela and Russia and China and so forth. That's a fact. Two, the Republicans, or at least a large chunk of them, believe that South Africa is morally compromised because of these issues around race based policies and that stuff. I'm not saying any of this is right. What I'm saying is the foreign policy establishment with South Africa, properly grappling with that reality and trying to come up with innovations and new ideas to address it. Because remember, as I've said on this program, we are not at a stage where this relationship has stopped deteriorating. We are nowhere near a reset. And I think we have to think about arresting the slide and what can be done to do that.
Dr. Terrence McNamee, appreciate your time. Let's hope you get that call from the Union buildings, eh?
Current events, developing stories,
tough questions.
Your voice making a difference.
This is Breakfast with Bongani Bingwa.